So almost 8 years ago, a group of us gathered in my home, Merrill and my home, here in Costa Mesa, because we felt like God wanted us to create a new community. We were a little uncertain as to what it would look like. We really didn't know who would come because we had just moved into the city ourselves. And it's been a remarkable journey, including managing to survive COVID, which is a story in and of itself. One of the things we felt God say to us, amidst the other things, build it around the table. And that's why we do this. The table is the center because we want Jesus to be front and center. Not the stage, not a pulpit, not musicians, not microphones, but the table, because Jesus has to be front and center for all that we do. The second thing we said, we really wanted to be a community that knows how to engage God in worship. We have 5 worship teams, and I just love worship, as do we all, and it's just wonderful to see how worship as a culture has grown in our community. Thirdly, we wanted to pray, and pray as much and as often as we could so that everyone can play. So that it's not a gathering based on the 3, whether it's in a home or as happened on Tuesday night in our monthly worship time. It really is a participation of everyone. Everyone plays. Fourthly, it's a storytelling community, both the Bible, which is the story of God, but also that everyone has a story and everyone's story is important. We will use a few of them tonight. Fifthly, mission. Mission is massive to us. We live for reasons beyond ourselves. I think the most tragic of churches, I remember in the 1890s, not that I was alive, but I did read about Archbishop William Temple, who said the church is the only organization that lives for the benefit of its non-members. And oh, how 100 years changed that. It became a micro community, myopic in nature, preoccupied simply by itself, valuing the gathering on Sundays, the number of bottoms in chairs, the amount of income that we have, the profile that we get, how many people watch our online program or whatever. That is the measure of biblical health and goodness. And we all know in our heart of hearts that has nothing to do with biblical goodness, biblical rightness, biblical truth. And so we want to create a community that's healthy, and part of that health is we live for reasons beyond ourselves. We've got 2 guys on the way home. We've just spent the last 8 days with the team driving on their motorcycles around Sri Lanka, going to preach in the churches that we work with there. Some of them highly remote, some you can only get to them on a footpath or motorcycles, because we want to live for reasons beyond ourselves. It's one of our yardsticks of how are we doing. When people ask me, Chris, how's Genesis doing? I know what they're asking me. My mother, how's Genesis doing, Chris? Mom, we're doing really well, thank you. I know what the next question is. So how many people do you have now? And I said, Mom, you know I won't answer that question. She said, I know, we'll chat some more. And then she'll say, how many people do you really have? I said, well, no more than when you asked me a minute ago, because that's a superfluous number. It's absolutely irrelevant in the bigger scheme of things. The Bible gives us a yardstick of health. One of them is multi-generationalism. We do not know how well our church is doing into the 2nd and 3rd generation. We're not a one-generational wonder. We want to be a community that multiplies itself out into many generations. But one of the things we felt God say is do not talk about money. Now, when your salary is dependent on it from day one, it's kind of not a cool thing not to do. In fact, Dana and I laughed the other day because it was probably about 18 months ago. She was part-time on staff. I'm part-time as well because of my international thing that I do. And we actually had to tithe in order to get paid. There wasn't enough money to get paid. So if we tithed, her and I, then we could get our salaries. And we kind of laughed about it, as we still do, because it's a good thing, as I'll talk about tonight, not only to be committed to financial generosity in the fat years, it's even more fun in the lean years. But I heard of a church that does this. Once a year, they take a month to prepare their church, and on the final Sunday, they take an offering, and that offering, all of it, 100% of it, is given away. And I was immediately compelled by that. I thought that's the kind of thing I would like to do. So in 2 weeks' time, Matt will come and teach and tell us his story. He learned that from Dave Ferguson in Chicago. Dave Ferguson leads a massive church there. And I think on a given, their annual kind of giveaway Sunday, something like 7 million that they just give away, strategically, intentionally. And I thought, no, that's a story worth telling. And so this month, we are going to dive in to celebrate generosity. We're going to prepare ourselves, and on the first weekend of March, building into that, you'll be able to start giving. We will land our Sunday night with a total, and the knowledge is 50% of it will go local, to local initiatives that we believe in, and then 50% of it will go global to some of the partners and projects that we are involved with around the world. How does that sound? So all of this is not for us or to us. God has had to teach us for almost 8 years to live by faith. We've had to pray money in when there wasn't enough money for whatever. And it's been a fun journey. I have had anxious moments, to be truthful. I can't lie about that. But now we're in the place where we are engaging in the text, finding the joy of what the text looks like in the light of a community that creates a culture of generosity. Now, I was thinking about it this week, actually for weeks as I've been preparing. And I remember the moment where I gave each one of my kids a car. Now, I don't think it's fancy because it wasn't. Nas, we gave Meryl's old Honda Civic. Dana, we gave her the little Scion, which Sam now has. And Tion got a little VW Passat, yeah. But I remember as a dad, always wanting to give more, of course, but that's what our pocket allowed. But the joy and freedom I saw with each one of my kids as they took the keys in their hands and knew that the horizon was open before them. And as I was preparing for this time, that picture came to mind that we are, in fact, putting keys in your hand, both individually and as a community, to engage in a life of generosity. And the incredible impact that that has, and the incredible way God can use you and use me in that regard. Evan, during the prayer this evening, pre-gathering prayer, you had a kind of a description of what you felt. Come and tell us if you don't mind. Nice, short, sweet, and sharp.
So I think generosity can be really exciting and have this experience like handing your keys off to your kids to drive. But at the same time, it can be really anxiety producing, right? And I think in the context of our culture, there's so much, especially about just being here in Orange County, that says accumulate more. It's about you, wealth, security, safety. And it feels like, I imagine for this next month, we will be walking kind of upstream. I imagine it's walking upstream because we're walking against the current of our culture, maybe even the stress of finances, even thinking about giving more than we've ever given before. So I wonder what it would be like to encourage each other, to like link arms and walk against a current and have this endurance together. Wonderful. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So walking upstream. So in 1984, the first pastors' conference we ever went to, we were kids, of course, and it was in the mountains in South Africa, and there was a kind of a river that ran through it. Forgive me, Brad Pitt, but the river ran through it. And so we decided it was a hot, kind of spicy summer day in South Africa, and a bunch of us jumped in a VW Combi, and we went down to the river for a swim. Meryl, do you want to finish telling the story?
Oh, man. So remember, I'm 22, okay? That's about the age I was. And we were with new people that, we'd never really been with. I knew one couple. We get into this combi, get to the river, and the men all go in. And then I look at this river, and it just looks so inviting and so appealing. And I'm like, oh, I really want to swim. So I think, great. And so I wade in. And so obviously I face up current, and then I start, swimming, breaststroke, because the current is really strong. And the men were like all, seemingly doing it very easily. And I just realized, whoa, like it's stronger than I thought. So I'm like really swimming to just stay abreast with the rock that I just leapt off, And So eventually I realized, no, this river is actually taking me. So I sort of say, Chris, I don't know these people. And I'm just like, Chris. And he doesn't answer me. And then I'm like, Chris. And he doesn't answer me. And finally I'm like, Chris. And I'm screaming. And I say, the river's taking me. And they all look at me. They all literally stop and look at me. And he just says, stand up. And I'm like, what? And I put my feet down, and I'm like, in about this deep water.
So just when we think we're swimming against the current, maybe it's not nearly as deep as you think it is. Even those of you with student loans, do you think God says, well, listen, when you stop having student loans, then you can become generous? I think not. Or when I get my mortgage down, then I can become, or maybe not. Well, let's see. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, and we'll pick up in verse 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 5. It'll pop up on the screen. Oh, it has. That one's not working. All right. So I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance. So he's preparing the church for an offering they're going to take. So this passage is really relevant to us. To visit you in advance and finish the arrangements for the generous gift you have promised. Then it will be ready as a generous gift, not as one grudgingly given. So we've got time to prepare our hearts, prepare our pockets, prepare our faith, prepare our anticipation and togetherness. Remember this. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. You put the keys in the hand of a 16, 17-year-old. The car's yours. Drive. I've never seen one break down, weeping in tears, world falling apart. Quite the opposite. This high sense of joy, this high sense of a freeway awaits me. For God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. Interesting link between poor and righteous. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you may be generous on every occasion. And through us, your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. The service that you perform is not only supplying the needs of the Lord's people, but also overflowing in many expressions of thanks to God. Because of the service for which you have proved yourselves, others will praise God for the obedience that accompanies your confession of what? The gospel and generosity. They're linked. The gospel of Christ and your generosity in sharing with them and with everyone else. And in their prayers for you, their hearts will go out to you because of the surpassing grace God has given you. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. Now, what is happening here? Well, as I'm told by cleverer people than I am, the Middle East, Judea, was going through a time of famine. And it placed incredible economic hardships on all alike. However, for the Christians, it went a little further, according to Skip Hayek from Albuquerque. What he said is that the temple in Jerusalem was run by the Sadducees. And the Sadducees were vehemently anti the resurrection. There was no resurrection. There's only this life. And when we die, we're gone. Many of the Christians, Skip says, were employed by the temple until such time as they started preaching Jesus has risen from the dead. And because that was in stark contrast to the Sadducees, they were fired, laid off. And so now we have a church wrestling under the weight of famine and economic hard times, married to the fact that many of them lost their jobs. And so where the core of Christianity was founded, now Paul has to call on the Gentile believers to help resource and care for the Christians in Jerusalem who were struggling under an enormous amount of poverty. Now, obviously, peeps, Jesus was never reluctant to speak about money. One author I read said he spoke about it at least 29 times. Come on, it's so important for all of us. It's such a vital part of all of our lives, and very few of us grew up in the healthy rhythms of grace, of what it looks like to have a wallet well filled but a heart of enormous generosity. Many, I'm guessing, would have lived under one of two extremes, a household that wrestled with the tension of low income and survivalism and all that comes, which is normally a fist created, holding on to everything and very reluctant to let it go. The others, of course, where there is abundance and then we're spoiled. A bit like Joseph and his coat of many colors. His dad completely spoiled him, and he spent 13 years in prison because of it. One is not more dangerous than the other. Economic tough times with its complexities and family of origin issues, and a parent who has just spoiled the kids, not knowing what the impact of that will be long term. But this passage, let's get into the good stuff. What is the big God idea here? Well, I love this because the big God idea is in verse 8. And God is able to bless you. Isn't that just a most magnificent phrase? And God is able to bless you. Isn't it wonderful to know the very character and nature of God is a blessing God? Think for a moment, those of you who've been around church for a while and know the story of Abraham. You know that God meets him. Who is he? He's a random wanderer whose family worshipped other idols. And for reasons we'll never understand, God handpicks this man, makes him a follower of Yahweh, and promises him, I will bless you. And then everything he has to go through doesn't always indicate the blessing that came with the promise. And then the moment we preachers love talking about, we parents love describing, is the moment on Mount Moriah when he's been told to go and sacrifice your boy. Give him up. God seems to tell him. Yahweh demands his son as a great prophetic picture of the evangelium, of the Jesus who was to come. And there he goes. And ultimately it's just his boy and him and a whole lot of wood. And his boy looks up at him, whatever age he was, and he says, hey, Pops, where's the ram? And this Abraham, who had a promise, and the promise was blessing, and the promise was a boy child, looks at his boy, and I'm sure with a broken heart, said to him, my boy, Yahweh, Yireh, God will provide. And so the introduction, this Abraham, who is the founding father of three jolly world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all lay claim to the same man as the origin of our faith, who was introduced to this God, Yahweh, who promised blessing, Yireh, who promised provision. It's incredible. The ESV says, God is able to make all grace abound to you so that, key phrase we'll get to in a moment, having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in all or every good work. The MSG version, to quote Stu, God can pour on the blessings in astonishing ways so that you are ready for anything and everything, more than just ready to do what needs to be done. The RSV, Revised Standard Version, and God is able to provide. He promises and provides. He promises and provides you with every blessing in abundance so that, we've got to preach the so that, as we'll get to in a moment, you may always have enough for everything and may provide in abundance for every good work. Now, dear friends, as I kind of scramble my way through it and get to some of the nitty-gritty pieces, please understand that the promises of God will be tested in the fat years, a la Joseph, and the lean years. The promise is not for fat years only. I remember at 57 sitting at the house. We didn't even have a house. We were sitting at Marcus's family's home. And I remember saying, Lord, I'm 57. I should be at the top of my game. By the worldly standards, I should be leading my largest church with biggest budget, with the biggest staff, with the biggest auditorium. And here I am by myself. But I found not a scowl or growl from heaven as he looked down upon me, but the tender hand of a father who said, but I have promised, son. And am I not true to my promise? That the God of the fat years is also the God of the lean years. In fact, there are lessons we learn about God's great kingdom economy, and we'll only learn them in times of have-nots. It's fun. A preacher of the 90s, Bob Mumford, said, I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better. And I want to say rich is better. But there is something sublime about the character of God that we learn in the lean years. Imagine that little boy. Imagine the little crisis. Can you imagine with me for a moment? This little boy hears Jesus, and there's thousands of people, 5,000 men, 15,000 people. And he's close enough to hear the conversation between Jesus and his disciples. And the disciples come and say, you know what, Jesus, we got nothing to eat. We're in the middle of nowhere. There's no Ralph's or, Uber. What are we going to do here? Can you imagine a little crisis? The little boy holds his picnic basket, 5 loaves, 2 fishes, and he thinks, what difference is this going to make? But Jesus, but what happens to me? Tell me, I'm going to be hungry. I mean, how old could he be? 7, 8, 9 years old? But if I give him what I have, then who's going to look after me? And how will that even help anyone? And I can imagine the moment he comes vulnerably with his little basket and kind of tugs at James's side or Thomas or whoever and says, I've got a couple of loaves and some fish. And I wonder if they brushed him off like 5,000, 15,000 people. What will this do? All right, goes to Jesus, says, Jesus, and Jesus casts his eye over. There's the little boy standing vulnerably uncertain, lots of people intimidated by the moment, and then Jesus takes it. And I think his eyes must have been full of love and grace and kindness and goodness. And he says, come. And he starts breaking the 5 loaves. See, ladies and gentlemen, we will all have our 5 loaves and 2 fish moment. That's the promise. Now, if we know that provision follows promise, that's easy. But when we don't know provision follows promise, it's real hard. The essential nature, the essential words here, and God is able to bless you abundantly so that. Those are the 2 exquisite words, so that. God is invested and involved with our lives. It's the language of intimacy and knowledge. God knows us so that. We had a really fun time at staff on Monday, talking about this. And Kai told a story, and I want him to come and tell us. And Hannah told us a story, the shortened version, because we preachers are very gifted with elongated stories. But I think it's good to hear, and it's good to hear it from them. Where are you, Kai? This is your night, man. This is your night. I'm telling you, it's all happening. Where's Hannah? Is she here?
So I was 22.
Not now.
Not now. No. This is over a decade ago now. So I was 22. I was a youth leader at a church in Long Beach. And, I just kind of felt God one night as I was praying and just feeling him say, pull out all the money in your bank account and go give it to church. And I was like, that's crazy. Let me keep praying. That's not what God is. And I literally just couldn't get past this. And I was 22. Anyone 22? Your concept of money is like crazy. So like I had $1,500. I'm like, bro, that's everything I got. That's so much money. And so I just like, let me go do it. So I drove to Wells Fargo tried to pull out $1,500, and my hand's probably shaking, and it didn't allow me. I met the limit. So I was like, oh, sorry, God, that's on you. Should have made the ATM take out more money. But I tried to go with $600, and I felt God say, no. I said everything. So I had to wait 3 more hours for it to strike midnight so that I can go back and take out the rest. It only allowed me to take $600, so $1,200. And I was like, And he's like, no, it's good. Gave me peace. Fast forward, I go, I take it, drop it off at the church. $1,200. I felt good, felt like that's what God was wanting me to do. Months later, I was getting a little discontent with where I was at with God, or with the church, and I felt God just calling me into a life of mission, a life of, whatever this next step of my life was. And my mom knew this guy named Sumo. He is this pastor in Huntington Beach, and he calls me one day and says, hey, your mom says you're a little kind of stale right now. I want you to come with me on this missions conference. I was like, okay, cool. I don't have any money. I'm poor. I don't really have any money. I just quit my job, actually, at that time. I ended up going to this meeting for the church that I was a youth leader at. And my pastor said, hey, we've been praying about it, and we feel like God is releasing you for the next season of your life. Don't really know what that means, but we just feel like we want to bless you. And he just slides this envelope across the table. Open it up. It's a check for $1,200. I was able to use that to buy a plane ticket to go on this missions conference with Sumo. Sumo then passes away in 2018, and I end up assuming as the pastor of that church. And so what for me in this was to see this moment of like, this feels risky, but not knowing what's going to come 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, meeting my wife in Huntington Beach, becoming a pastor, getting to know Chris, and now being an elder here. So $1,200 gave me a life of adventure with Jesus.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I have lived a relatively short life. I feel like I've been an adult for 5 minutes. But honestly, I can say with confidence that the last couple years have been the hardest in my life ever. And honestly, I'm kind of still in the middle of just a really hard season. But this story is one that I'm looking at even as I look forward to the next couple of months, full of fears. God is really with me, and God is really, he loves me, and my name means favored, and God favors me. And so, anyway, I am trying to think of what to cut because you said to go fast. I quit my job a couple years ago. I was working for a tech startup company making more money than I've ever made in my life, and felt like that was soul-sucking and like I was selling myself, and just felt really convinced that I could accidentally work 10 years in that job, and I didn't want to, and that's a personal conversation with the Lord. So anyways, I quit this job. I had in 2 years saved up a year's worth of living expenses, and I was like, I'm just going to take it easy. I'm going to work part-time. I'm going to get out of the house. I had been working remotely, and yeah, I'm going to just like pray about like what my calling is and like what kind of work I want to do and what feels fruitful and beautiful and whatever. So I submit my notice on Friday, and then I go to a doctor's appointment on Monday to follow up on a old sprained ankle injury, and found out that I had torn a ligament and that it required surgery, which was really bad time to leave a job with unlimited sick pay. So I'm like thinking like, can I ask for my job back? Like, should I ask for my job back? And I felt the Lord say no. And at this point, I'm stressed but not panicked because I'm like, well, I have a year's worth of living expenses. It'll go fast if I'm not working at all, but that's okay. So I have surgery, and it's a gnarly recovery. You guys watched it. It's like 6 months of just kind of not having your body. So yeah, have surgery, and then honestly, even at this time, I'm totally living on grace. Like I feel like God was really speaking like that I don't have to be desperate enough for him to provide for me. So I received generous gifts, and and also was paying my own expenses, kind of both. And yeah, I started walking again, sort of started working part-time a little bit, and then 6 months out, we had kind of been keeping an eye on my recovery from surgery. It had been slow, and at the 6-month mark, we kind of categorized the surgery as unsuccessful. And so I found out that I would have to have another surgery, which I didn't even know was an option, to do the same thing again if it doesn't work. And this surgery, the writing was on the wall. I knew I survived the first one financially, but this one is going to wipe me out. This is going to be a devastating blow. So yeah, have the second surgery. At this point, I'm on food stamps. I applied for disability, but after 6 months of hearing nothing, it became very apparent to me that you can qualify for government aid and still not get the money. It's very difficult to get what you sometimes qualify for. So that was my experience. This is very recent history now. So the surgery was last summer, my second surgery, and I think it was November, the beginning of November. I was down to $1,900 in my bank account. My rent is $1,100, and don't ask me how my health insurance is $800, but it was at the time. And that's it. It doesn't cover any of my other living expenses. I'm like, I can pay my bills for December. I call my parents. They're like, we can help you with your student loans. I'm like, well, I won't be driving because I don't have any money for gas, but it's fine. We'll get through December. I'll go home for Christmas, and then I'll figure it out. Maybe I won't come back. I don't know. I don't really know what my options are. And around that time, also kind of a complicated story, but there was a need that got presented to me that was, in the grand scheme of things, not a lot of money, but when you have $1,900 in your bank account, it's a lot of money. And I heard about the need, and I said, I'm not even going to ask God about if I should participate in that because I know what he'll say. And I felt like I could feel God looking at me. And so then I looked at him, and I was like, I don't actually have that money. And he said, you do have it. And I said, well, I won't. In 2 weeks, it'll be gone. So, and also, I don't owe this. This money can come from anywhere. It doesn't have to come from me. And God said, I know. And then I was like, well, okay. And honestly, I didn't share this at staff on Monday, but the story that popped into my mind was the story of the man who has forgiven all of his debts, the parable. He's forgiven all of his debts, and then he goes and demands all of his money from everybody else. And I thought, if I have been living on grace, for literally now a year and a half, I'm no better than the man who demands his money back if I don't, share what I have in this moment. So I give the money, and then the next 3 days, literally 1, 2, 3, I get checks in the mail. I finally got my disability, and they back paid me all the way to May. And so literally I got one day a check, the next day a check, the next day a check. It was replenished my entire savings, was more money. I couldn't even deposit it all at once. I had the opposite problem of Kai. My bank was like, we can't take this much money. I was like, okay, this is awesome. And I think honestly, I can't, it's hard to talk about because it's just it's a feeling that I didn't think, I thought that the way that God gave to me was in the jars of flour and oil that don't run out. I had this prayer with God, I need a big miracle, and all I'm getting is you just barely have enough for tomorrow. And I was convinced that that was all that God could or would do for me, that was my story, was just barely hanging in all the time. And I got my fish and loaves and my water into so much wine. There was a bunch left over, and I just, it was very miraculous to me, so.
Beautiful, thank you, thank you. So these are all examples of how God is taking us on a journey and how God wants to grow our giving muscles to create a culture of generosity within the community. Isn't it interesting? If you sort of go to the next slide, you will see, did you notice as I read the passage, the couplets, poor and righteousness connected? To have, by implication, no or a low-grade commitment to the poor, it reflects poorly on your righteousness. I'm not too sure how, but it does. Seed and bread. The promise of God is that you will get seed for seed, in other words, to sow, but also bread to eat. There is this high value of the gospel and generosity. One author I read said that if you're not generous, you haven't allowed the gospel access to the generosity of your soul. In other words, you've kept it. You're like, okay, or me, we're holding out on God. We haven't allowed the Lordship of Christ access into the generosity of our soul. And then lastly, of course, service and thanksgiving. There's this beautiful, Paul writes, this interplay. Each is dependent on the other. Each feeds off the other. Each is powered by the other. Now, next slide, please. So when we created the Genesis story, we decided, under kind of unction from God, just trust me. And so that's what we've done. When we haven't had money, we've prayed. We've asked God. And sovereignly, amazingly, a father of a student in the church will send a $5,000 check. When I was wrestling with whether we should bring Kai and Rachel on full-time, we'd never had any full-time staff, someone dropped 30 grand in the banking account. So, okay, Lord, I'm listening. And we never want to lose that sense of faith and trust. But at a foundational level, and I'm going to skedaddle through this quickly. Next slide, please. There are these areas of biblical giving that I want to introduce to all of us. And there isn't time to go through them at length. A couple of stories will intersperse, but I am aware of the clock. The first is the tithe. And it started with Abraham and Melchizedek when Abraham gave him a tenth of the spoils. Chris, do you really believe in this stuff? You know, I really do. It's not a hill I will die on. I'm not going to fight with anyone about it. Generally, when people come and want to debate, I just say to them, do you give more than your 10%? No, I don't. Well, then please don't debate me. When you give more than that, then we can have a conversation. I think you've got an issue with generosity, and you are putting it down to legalism. I don't. For almost 50 years, 2 years' time, I would have been walking with Jesus for 50 years. For 50 years, Meryl and I, but 1 month. But 1 month. I'll never forget, I was a college student, and I thought I couldn't afford to tithe. And I felt God kindly and gently say to me, really? Really? You can't trust me? And it has been the most captivating, compelling story of our lives. Over and over again, story after story. When I'm in unhealth, and I'm an 8, so an 8, when he's unhealthy, is really unhealthy. I mean, it's really not good, you know. But sometimes people irritate me because they want my time. I want to say, I will happily see you. Do you tithe? Because if you don't tithe, please don't ask for time. But I won't say it because that would be really unkind and whatever. But imagine tonight we go across to folks and we're going to get some pizzas, and then the bill comes and you say, yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm not paying here. And the manager says, excuse me, you've had all these pizzas. No, I feel led tonight to pay at Salty Bear. I just feel led. And I'm not sure, I'm sure the manager will be startled by your charismatic jargon, which has no basis or substance in reality, because the reality is it doesn't work that way. God gives, at least from my conviction, the tithe as a basis for us to be able to run local communities. One occasion where Jesus spoke about the tithe in Matthew, he says when the, let me read it so I don't butcher it. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and kindness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. Jesus is validating the tithe. Again, I'm not going to fight on it. I just think it's grassroots, ground level, a tenth of your gross income. You pour it into your local community, and you allow the benefits, privileges of what a community life looks like. Are you with me? Now listen, folks, again, can I be very honest, and can I have a fatherly moment? The ministry has been incredibly kind to Meryl and I. 40 plus years now we've walked with Jesus. 40 years we've trusted for the church to salary us on an adventure of faith. But can I be honest with you? And I sit with pastors who weep because they can't get their kids a pair of sneakers. And they know that people in their church are giving their money to some other cool, sexy pastor who's got a higher profile and needs another jet. It's disgusting. You don't go to the doctor and say, Doc, I need you. And as you go, you arrive, and they say, would you swipe your credit card? I say, no, I'm sorry. I'm really not paying for this doctor because I'm going to pay for the nutritionist down the road. Stu, when he preached on stewardship, said, isn't that incredible that we all accept 15% when we go to eat tonight as our minimum tip? But we're offended that God would suggest 10%. How dare God? I'm not going to fight on this hill. I'm giving you the keys of an incredible adventure. And if time allowed, we would tell story after story of 50 years of believing in this and giving ourselves to this over and over and over again. It is the most exquisite opportunity to bless. Quickly, secondly, offerings. They're a separate entity biblically. Offerings are for things. Remember when they're building the Ark of the Tabernacle and Moses says, we need some stuff, and it's a beautiful passage, the only one in Scripture where the people give so much, and the people continue to bring free will offerings after the morning. So all the skilled workers were doing all the work. The people were bringing more than enough for doing the work, and so Moses issued an order, no man or woman to make anything else as an offering for the sanctuary. Stop giving, Moses said. Stop! You're giving too much money. That's a beautiful, beautiful passage. Stu's executive coach, or whatever he calls him, said, Stu, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't mind public correction, but something to this effect, decide how much you want to earn, lavishly, generously, the quality of life that you and your family want, and then earn that. And whatever you gain on top of that, give it away. Give it away. Why get more? It's a beautiful biblical picture, and I believe he is a Christian. Thirdly, alms. I'm just interested, how many of you have received finances from within the community, meaning someone paid a hospital bill, paid a doctor's bill, paid your car, you were given a car, a medical bill, something. I'm just interested. Just raise your hand. Just keep your hand up. Now, folks, this makes my heart incredibly warm. This is community at her best. When we, as a community, look after each other. A little story, and I will not mention names because I have not asked the person involved. The person came to me last week and said, I saved X thousands of dollars to do something. And I'm being purposefully nebulous. And I was so delighted. I chatted with my wife. She said, you've been working so hard, saving so hard. Why don't you go and spend the money on X, Y, and Z? Made a big mistake. Last Sunday, prayed for someone. Big mistake. Big mistake. Says, well, what is it you need? Well, I need God to help me get out of debt on a doctor's bill. How much do you need? I cannot get out of debt, said this particular Genesis human. No matter what I do, I cannot get out of debt. Then you ask the vulnerable question that you don't actually want answered. How much do you need to pay off your debt? What is the answer? Exactly the same. What does he do? He goes home, renounces the devil, takes authority over all the whispers of darkness, knowing that God wants to bless him. Chris preached on that on Sunday. God wants to bless him. He went, gave her a check, and she is out of debt. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the kingdom economy. All right, almost done. Thank you for being kind. Fourthly, apostolic given. That's for the nations. We won't go there now. Lastly, because I want to get here, it's a super fun one, and that is a lifestyle of generosity. That's where God wants all of us to get to. Tithing is kindergarten. Honestly, it's kindergarten stuff. But this lifestyle of generosity is so freaking compelling. Two stories from the same man. Very close friend of mine. In fact, He and his wife took over the leadership of the church we planted in South Africa and is now running a really large church. So, scenario number one, they're in a building project and during COVID, and they are in need of 7 million rand. Don't worry about the currency exchange, just hear the story. They need 7 million rand to pay the next bill for their building during COVID by Friday. They have an elders meeting. They look at the elders, and there is 600,000 or 700,000 that they've got in the bank. It's 10% of the 7 million they need. Rory turns to his elders and said, brothers, the only thing we can do is give this away. If you haven't got 7 million, you haven't got 7 million. Whether it's 0 or 600, it's not 7 million. The elders looked at him askance, as to say, you are officially crazy. You are officially nuts. Well, said Rory, there is a church down the road, smaller church, that has got a building project that doesn't have the money because of COVID. Let's give them our money. This is Tuesday. They write a check. They give to that church who has a building project. That church is rejoicing because it's an answer to prayer. What happens on Friday? 7 million comes in so they can pay the builder. That is a lifestyle of generosity. But I've got some pictures to show you. Because one of Rory's personal things, have we got them? All right, throw them at us. Oh dear, oh dear. I wonder how that slipped in. Oh dear. I don't know, something about sowing and reaping and bread. I don't know, I just saw it. Okay, the next picture. Oh, no, don't worry about that. Because actually that was during COVID, and that brother was smiling, not because of his generosity, but because he found loo paper and he didn't share it with the rest of us. So the next picture, please. Okay. So Rory's passion is to pay for people who have really poor dental health. So I texted him. I said, Rory, would you mind if I tell the story? And he said, absolutely not. This is the latest little girl. He found her in George. They were traveling through George, which is a town in South Africa, and he saw her, and his heart went out to her, and he felt God say, pay for her to have her teeth done. That is a lifestyle of generosity. That is way and above the foundational work that God calls all of us. That's when God gives us an assignment because we're open to being generous. Next slide, please. So he meets with her and he says, I want to pay for your teeth to be straightened. I want that to simmer in for just a moment. This is not an idea. This is a God-living conviction. Of saying, I want to live a life of generosity. You say, Chris, I can't afford that. Of course you can't, because you and I haven't said yes yet. It's only when we say yes that we can afford it, because we're now entering the world of God's promise matched with God's provision. And what we are going to see over this month, I'm going to give you the final picture in a moment. What you and I are going to see over this next month is God's provision because He has promised it. And the reason why He's promised it is it's not for our pocket, our benefit, the new car or whatever. It's for the poor who God values, and He will exchange our commitment to the poor with a journey of righteousness. This is what this young lady looks like now. Because one man has heard God and felt it his duty. Those that he meets who have all sorts of dental complexities to pay for them. Isn't that kingdom economics? Isn't that living another kind of life? Isn't that extra thing that I need to buy at that sale, and I really need to have my 7th whatever, fill in the blank? What if some of those things could be stored up as seed to sow, and to sow them into someone else's life? I'm coming into land. So we sat in the staff meeting, and I said, come on, people, how much do you think we could get in? And so each staff member gave a number. And I was interested by that. So I sat there with my iPhone and did some calculation. What if, and this is only a what if thing, numbers please. What if 5 of us give $5,000 each? What if 10 of us give $1,000 each? Remember, this is a faith step. This is way more, and I can tell you stories about that. What's in your wallet? What if 20 people give 500 each? What if 50 people give 100 each? What if 50 people give 50 each? That's $52,000 from our little community, 135 giving units. 26,000 goes to Sam. What could you do with 26,000? What could an orphanage in Sri Lanka that fits 15 people into one room, what could $5,000 do for them? Well, it could build them another room and a half, at least. See, this isn't even faith. This is us putting up our hand and saying, all right, Lord, this is scaring the heebie-jeebies out of me, and I'm swimming upstream, to quote Meryl's story. But what if God says, now stand up? Where do you see yourself here? Might be the question from on high. And what if a month's time, the first Sunday in March, as the numbers come in, as we land, I get up and say, ladies and gentlemen, the final number that's come in so far is a little girl has had her teeth fixed and can smile brightly, not awkward or embarrassed in those middle school years because her teeth are really mangled, but we've given someone the gift of life. Now, isn't that kingdom economics? So I've asked some of the Bonhoeffer guys, so twice a month, a group of 16 young men meet with me, and we have coffee next door, and we talk around the theology of Bonhoeffer. I've asked 4 of them to come and join me, and we're going to minister communion. And this is what I'd love us to do this evening in the spirit of celebration. God's promise, God's provision. Thanks, Chloe. God's promise, God's provision. Can we come to the table tonight to celebrate? Now, not the cross, which we often do, and rightfully so, but this is the resurrection, the empty tomb. Chloe? This is the resurrection and the empty tomb. This is the moment of sovereign provision. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead dwells in me. So, brothers, can you join me, please?
Thank you for listening to the Genesis Costa Mesa podcast. To find more information about our community, feel free to visit our website, www.genesiscostamesa.com, or find us on social media at Genesis Costa Mesa.